All right. On Friday, we were going over things with Homer Plessy, where we had the 1896 Supreme Court case. Let's see, you missed all this stuff, Jim. Animal.
I wrote it down. I just want to say I did see Chandler on Friday after school.
I don't remember that.
I would say you look like Ben Affleck. You said that so many times. Yeah. You like never acknowledged it. Yeah, you didn't acknowledge it. I thought you were just ignoring Ben Affleck.
These hearing aids aren't getting any younger.
Not many things. My ears do let me hear.
No, they don't.
Seventh period thought he looked like.
Okay. What?
Seventh period, because we got a couple people take language enrichment with Mrs. Burns. There's a Thoreau poster, and they thought he looked like the guy next to Thoreau in the poster. So I double checked to see who that was. Not Ben Affleck, but Herman Melville, so Moby Dick author. But neither. But okay, so we got the 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson Supreme Court case, separate but equal, where we're going over the whole Railroad Card Act that was taking place in Louisiana, and then that led us into Brown versus Board of Education, the 1954 ruling that overrules, that turns over the separate but equal. So it recognizes that things are inherently unequal when they are separate. But the main thing to remember from this ruling is the decision that separate but equal is unlawful only works within the realm of education. So when we get into talking about Birmingham here in about 10 minutes, the main protests that are taking place in Birmingham has very little to do with schooling. It's more so looking at the business district, the merchant district, employment opportunities, and things like that. So, you know, from a civil protest standpoint, Rosa Parks is probably one of the more famous examples that you folks would be aware of. Anyone recall, and we didn't mention it on Friday, I don't think, anyone recall the year of Rosa Parks' Montgomery bus boycott?
1995.
I'm gonna say it was 18
solid. 18 buses.
4.
I wanted to see how far he was going to go with this, so I could say the same thing. Rosa Parks is 1955. Okay, so the boycott is 55 through 56, which is obviously after 1954, because the way the years work is we count up. I mean, BC, we did count backwards. I don't think we knew we were doing it at the time. But, like, this would have absolutely nothing to do with the legal ramifications of separate buses or sections on buses or railway cars if we were going back to Homer Plessy, because Brown versus Board of Education is only saying within education, within public schools, that you would have to desegregate. Anyone remember the phrase that gets used in the ruling so far as how quickly this has to be enacted? The districts, the states have to do this with...
It was something subjective.
I was like,
very subjective,
Deliberate
yeah.
speed.
Deliberate speed.
Yeah, because I said I'm hacking up with the.
You should do this. It's okay if you don't.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and then you said
Well, and not going that far. Not going that far that it's okay that if you don't. Because it is understood that you do have to move through with this. And at the time, in 1950s, in 1954, Eisenhower is president. I think in like today's political climate culture, we generally, and obviously not saying this is 100% accurate, from a political party standpoint, who do we kind of think of as being more open to change or maybe having more, I don't want to say liberal views because that means Democrat pretty much right away, but I think we tend to think of Democratic Party as being the ones that might be more open to this. So like in the South, generally the southern states, and whether you're dealing with white or black voters, generally tend to vote Democratic. At this point in time, though, it is the Democrats that tend to be pro-segregation. Eisenhower is in office. Republicans are looked at as being a little bit more open-minded, so to speak, when it does come to race relations and things of that nature. So Eisenhower is in office. Eisenhower's okay with the Brown versus Board of Education. So you do start to get even like a little bit of some political issues taking place because you have a lot of Democratic mayors and governors in the South. Eisenhower, not solely that he would want to flex his muscle from a bipartisan kind of standpoint, but you are kind of setting up a little bit of a Republican versus Democrat conflict, so to speak. It does change with Kennedy. Kennedy's Democrat. Kennedy is a big proponent of the Civil Rights Movement, has a pretty good working relationship with Martin Luther King Jr. and whatnot, so it does kind of start to shift, but most pro-segregationists are strong Democrat political ties, which I think in 2018 we kind of go, didn't necessarily think that would be the case. So Eisenhower does want to see this stuff going through. But if you are a Republican governor, if you're a Republican mayor, and you're worried about re-election, you will have a lot of folks who are, well, I don't want to necessarily start changing this right away because I could be hurting my voters. The other political issue that it also kind of starts to set up is even though you have Supreme Court, federal control versus state control. And so that kind of starts to set up a little bit of a climate as well. The best case of this really kind of going into crisis mode, anyone have any ideas, any particular cities or school districts that really take issue with Brown versus Board of Education?
It was a college one.
Well, University of Alabama is certainly an example. There's one before that, and the college issue is something that also kind of comes up because if you have state fund, like depending how the funding is at private public school, but the main traditional public school issue you have is the Little Rock 9, also gets referred to as the Little Rock Crisis, or Little, hello. Uh-oh, the little error reporting guy is starting to show up. This will take forever. You have the Little Rock 9, 1957. Okay, is when the Little Rock 9 is taking place. Little Rock 9, not a baseball team or anything along those lines. Little Rock 9 is 9 African American students are selected to desegregate Little Rock Central High School. Little Rock Public Schools has 4 high schools. 2 up to this point have been for African Americans, 2 have been for all white students. So they decide that they are going to desegregate, sure, send a report. They're going to desegregate Little Rock Central High School with 9 students in 1957. They select 9 students who feel are going to be strong both with academics and character. They understand that you're probably going to be dealing with a lot of taunting, jeering, and all that kind of stuff while you're in school. Do you think you're going to be able to handle this? And so the idea is yes. So it's not just 9 random students. It's not a lottery system of, oh, I have to go, I didn't want to go. You have 9 students who are willing to go, 9 students who people think, administrators, teachers would be able to kind of handle it as best anyone could. So we'll see what happens. Ooh, we're making progress. Yes. So they have 9 students go. When school starts for 1957, the governor, who is Democrat, is a guy by the name of Orville Faubus, not Orville Redenbacher for popcorn. You know who that guy is anymore? Okay, good. But you have Governor Orville Faubus. He calls in the Arkansas National Guard, similar to kind of what's happening in Alabama, calls in the National Guard, even though it's called National, it's still Arkansas, so he would kind of be like the commander-in-chief of the National Guard for Arkansas. Calls in the National Guard to prevent the students from entering the school. Now he makes this call. This isn't like on the first day of school at 6 a.m. He calls in the National Guard. Makes it well known ahead of time that I'm going to have the National Guard there to prevent the students from coming in. So not only would you have students who could potentially be coming into the building, having to deal with other students, parents, possibly even faculty not wanting to be there, but there's going to essentially be a military presence that will be preventing them from entering the building. So Little Rock 9, 1957, Governor Orville Faubus calls in the Arkansas National Guard. I already said this, who's president? Eisenhower. And Faubus has pretty good, he has just been elected the previous year in 1956. He stays governor for 12 years. He does 2 6-year terms. He tends to have pretty good popularity ratings. He is a major from World War II and whatnot, so that's pretty good standing with most of the people. Eisenhower, in response, you call in the National Guard, he calls in the 101st Airborne Division to have the Arkansas National Guard stand down. Now, these are not paratroopers who are coming in and rappelling down the walls of the high school or anything like that. And he doesn't call in the entire 1st, Airborne Division, but he has segments of it coming in. An important thing that he does is the 101st Airborne Division is an integrated division. So you have both, white and black soldiers. He only has the white soldiers coming in, so that you don't create an issue where you have black military personnel supporting black students going up against white military personnel with white governor and mayor and townspeople and all that stuff. The members of the 101st Airborne Division that come in are all white. But basically what Eisenhower does is he takes the state-run National Guard and federalizes it, where he goes, okay, I'm in control, they have to stand down for it. So leading up to, before people are coming into school, it's the first day of school, Heath would be going, all right, the Airborne Division's going to be there, the National Guard's going to be there, the media cameras and all that stuff are going to be there. It is turning into a big production, so to speak, even before people start stepping out into the school. So people do show up to school. You can see, and I know the pictures aren't exactly the most clear ones, but you can clearly see military personnel who is present here. And the idea is the 101st Airborne Division is going to also escort the Little Rock 9 into their different classes and whatnot, at least throughout the first couple of weeks of school. So in some ways you kind of have, I wouldn't say armed protection, but you at least have protection there. Now they can't go absolutely everywhere. The female students run into the most issues within the female bathrooms, because you're not going to have male soldiers going into the female restrooms or whatnot. So really it's the female students that probably have to deal with more of intimidation, bullying, taunting, and all that kind of stuff in some cases than the male students do. One of the iconic photographs, and there's been a lot of different angles, perspectives with this photo, but usually focuses on, and I don't recall her name, but this student walking in, and then you see like mothers and aunts and siblings of other students standing around. I want to say it was the 50-year anniversary in 2007 that when Oprah still had her TV show, that she had those two on show together, and it was the first time they had really knowingly seen or come across one another in 50 years. So she had that little kind of get together. But where I think sometimes people expect that maybe it'll be the male politicians or the fathers of students who are going to be causing the most issues, it doesn't matter, gender, age, height, weight, whatever. Pretty much you have a whole bunch of unhappy people taking place coming here protesting the fact that the schools are going to be desegregated. Of the 9 students, so of the Little Rock 9, only one graduates. Ernest Green is the only graduate from Little Rock of the 9 students that goes. And he graduates in 1957. He's a senior. It's a senior that he comes over. He graduates. He goes to Michigan State. Nina, he is not a Michigan fan. No, not at all. We'll save that for another day. But he is the only one who graduates. Of the others do not graduate for a variety of reasons. Some decide to go back to their other schools. They've had to deal with a lot of harassment. some are expelled. You have a student who, and I can't recall her name off the top of my head, she's eating lunch in the cafeteria, you're dealing with, taunting, spitting, jeering, and all this kind of stuff. So she takes her bowl of chili, dumps it on the kid's head who's been, taunting her the whole entire time, and she's the one who faces suspensions and turns into expulsions. You have where one of the students, one of the other female students, has acid thrown at her during a science class. It could be cafeteria, it could be bathrooms, it could be gym class, you could be in chemistry class, and you have to deal with all this stuff. And it could be coming from students, it could be coming from administrators, it could be coming from parents, it could probably also be coming from fellow teachers as well. What really kind of makes, well, I shouldn't say what really, but what adds on to this that makes it even a greater problem and issue is the following year. 1958 is called in Little Rock the Lost Year. Why would it be referred to as the Lost Year? Little Rock School District shuts down. No school for anybody. Who do you think proposes the idea?
Governor for the.
Good guess. You are correct. What were you going to go with? Or did she just beat you to it? Okay. What happens is toward the end of the 1957 school year, so in May, and keep in mind that Little Rock is the capital. So, Faubus is right there. It's not like Pittsburgh having some issues while Harrisburg's a couple hundred miles over that way. This is all going together on in one place. Faubus makes the recommendation that we shut down all of the public schools. At which point, folks will have Emma's reaction. Well, what am I supposed to do?
Library.
Would you say library? What and there's outcry among also white citizens as well. Is you can't just completely shut down the schools. Can't we go back to desegregating? Well, no. In some ways, this is him turning his nose up to Eisenhower. That if you're going to make me desegregate, well, then I'm just going to shut the whole thing down. So you got some political issues going on as well. For him to go that I'm going to shut down the whole entire school district, you have to have voter referendum. So voters have to approve this. The day before the voting takes place, Faubus has a big town meeting. He basically some town hall meetings. He sets forth that we are going to sell the schools or lease the schools to private schools. So your students, or not students, but your children will still get educated at the same building. They're just going to go to private schools. There would be a concern that's going to start happening for some people. Well, if they're going to private schools, that usually means that I have to pay some kind of tuition. Prices will be kept low. However, the train of thought is if it's a private school, you can kind of set up your own enrollment situations. Plus, there's going to be the assumption at the time, and part of it could be because of segregated business districts and whatnot, that African American families won't have the funds to necessarily pay for it as well as white families will. So the voters accept it, they pass the referendum, and then the private schools pull out. So the plan was that we would have these 4 private schools. They decide, no, we're not going to do this. So 1958 is completely lost, where you have no schooling taking place, no education taking place. So Zach's plan of going to the library becomes basically the next, plan. Who receives most of the public blame? If we didn't have the Little Rock 9, if we weren't doing this whole desegregation thing, then we wouldn't have to deal with the problem. So you are having, these folks, not just specifically those 9, but basically African American community is receiving the blame then from the white population as to why you end up having a lost year in 1958. Eisenhower starts putting more pressure on them to kind of move forward. By 1959, they do open the schools again. The desegregation process kind of starts all over again. It's not until about 1963, I think, that the middle schools are now starting to get desegregated to be integrated. And then by the mid-60s, it becomes more traditional public school system. But you have people where you're willing to shut down a school district, not just like a grade or anything, for the course of 1 year just to try to prove a point that we don't want to accept this. So just because you have a Supreme Court ruling doesn't mean necessarily that everyone is going to fall into line. And that's where it kind of takes us now to Birmingham with 1963 letter from Birmingham jail. Birmingham, Alabama is considered by many to be, at the time, one of the most, if not the most racist cities in the United States. Has a 60-40 population split, 60% being white, 40% being black. The Birmingham campaign actually starts in November of 1962. And the plan is to kind of model what was happening with Rosa Parks. But we're not going to do this with bus lines only. We are going to have sit-ins, kneel-ins, which would be taking place at like churches, synagogues, protests, and boycotts, which could be buses, but also could be other things. Basically to disrupt the economy. The issue within Birmingham that people are trying to change is Birmingham is segregated so far as churches, hotels, movie theaters, restaurants, stores, and whatnot. You not only will have segregated places like that for entertainment, also more basic necessities are going to be segregated. There's like segregated water fountains, there's segregated bus stops, there's segregated laundromats and whatnot that people would go to. Also, within Birmingham, within the city limits, if you're African American, the only jobs that you would have available to you would be household services, so if you're going to be like gardener, maid, something along those lines, or labor. Birmingham has a pretty significant steel mill industry, similar to what Pittsburgh would have in the 50s and 60s. So labor or household services would be the only opportunities that would be available. So within stores, there would not be any clerks, cashiers that would be African American. You wouldn't have any secretaries within white collar businesses and things of that nature. So the hope is that they can, by doing sit-ins, kneel-ins, protests, boycotts, you can disrupt the economy. Why start doing this in November of 1962? If you're trying to disrupt the economy?
Christmas.
It's the biggest shopping time of the year. So starting in November, they're doing all these things where the idea is you're going to keep people from going in, you're going to keep white shoppers from going in, you're basically forcing them to boycott businesses and whatnot, try to get some change happening within Birmingham. It has a pretty sustained campaign. They do it again then in March, or they keep trying to ramp it up in March, which is just before Easter, which in Birmingham is the second most popular shopping time of the year. So it's during this time, when it's the Easter season, that Martin Luther King becomes a part of the campaign. The police chief is a guy by the name of Bull Connor. He tried to run for governor of Birmingham. He was not elected. He is certainly pro-segregationist. He would be trying to keep people separate as much as he can. Before Good Friday, on Good Friday's April the 12th, on the 10th, on April the 10th, so it starts in March, but April's when Easter's actually going to be. On April the 10th, they get from Birmingham a court-ordered injunction that bans the protests that would be described up above. From a legal standpoint, what's the problem with that? Court-ordered injunction saying you cannot do kneel-ins, you cannot do civil disobedience. Zach's making the look like there's something going on here.
Yeah, it's like you're from like the rights of the Constitution.
So the belief is from the demonstrator side, from the protest side, that this is infringing upon our First Amendment rights, that we have the right to assemble, so long as you're doing it in a peaceful manner. You know, if you started marching downtown Pittsburgh with torches and pitchforks, you know, you could be arrested at that point. That would certainly be an issue. So it is known that this has been brought up. So on April the 12th is when King and about 50 others decide that we are going to protest anyway. So it's understood that when they do their protest on April the 12th, and which is basically a march, that they are going to be arrested. So similar to Plessy being arrested in Louisiana, King understands that he's probably going to be arrested. Not only does the police chief get a court-ordered injunction, he also gets bail raised to $1,500 if you are arrested, which in 2018 equivalency, you're looking around $10,000. So not only are you going to get arrested, it's going to be a lot harder for people to get you out. So if 50 of you get arrested, and say you're being sponsored, 50 of you get arrested at $10,000 a piece, all of a sudden your organization would need $500,000, in equivalency to get you out. So 50 people is a significant number that go marching with King, but the number is pretty much lower because people are afraid that they're not going to be able to afford, getting bail money and things like that. King gets arrested. He ends up being placed in solitary confinement, so it's cutting off access to his lawyers, to his legal team. He doesn't have the ability to get, in touch with his wife to let him know that he's okay. And then, as you can see on Letter from Birmingham Jail, April the 16th, 1963 is when he writes Letter from Birmingham Jail. On scraps of newspaper that he's able to get, a legal pad is able to get, into him from his legal team before communication is shut off. This is a big deal within the United States because he's obviously a well-known person. Kennedy, at this point, is president. Kennedy also has a little bit, bless you, of an international crisis on his hands because who is absolutely loving this? United States of America, land of the free, home of the brave, everyone gets along. I'm looking at Jesse. What international superpower is making sure that their media is broadcasting this all the time? You're in the midst of the Cold War, so that Eastern European bloc is absolutely making sure that this is getting out there, that, they're not only arresting demonstrators, but you're arresting peaceful clergy members, and you're going against human rights and things of that nature. So the whole media campaign is certainly going on. So Kennedy has a little bit of an international issue going on besides the domestic one. You have to let him out, and so eventually they do after spending about 10 days in jail. Once King gets released from jail, there's not as much media attention going on now because, okay, he's out of jail, so what? But there's not a whole lot of change that's taking place either. It's not until May, like the end of April, beginning of May, that you start to get a lot more protesters involved. There's still court-ordered injunctions. They are still getting arrested. What happens, though, is now the protesters want as many people as possible to be arrested so that you can disrupt the prison system. So it gets to the point where it takes like 6 hours to get breakfast out to everyone. The jails are overcrowded. So now what the police start doing is we're not just going to arrest people, but we're going to prevent them from coming downtown. So that's when the police dogs get involved. That's when the fire hoses are starting to be used. And again, now this is getting media attention all over the place that you're not even letting these people, even attempt to do anything before you're unleashing dogs and, high pressure velocity water and all that kind of stuff on. Which basically is, what ends up happening. So they continue to flood downtown, and you're getting more images and media attention of this going on. And again, it's going on that whole international scale that, okay, now look what they're doing. At which point, finally, May 10th is when Birmingham agrees that we'll desegregate because they can't have this going on. And the whole boycott issue is working because no one's going to go downtown if the police dogs are there, the fire hoses are being used, whether you're white, black, purple, male, female, human, alien from outer space, whatever, you're going to try to stay away from there as much as you can. So inevitably it does work. In May of 63 is when they do desegregate. In 64 is then when the Civil Rights Bill goes to Congress. Kennedy starts it. He's assassinated in 63 in November, so LBJ's president at the time. And then in '65 is when the Civil Rights Bill gets passed. Kennedy, before his assassination, says, the civil rights activists should thank Bull Connor as much as anyone else because of the attacks, because of the police using the fire hoses and whatnot. That creates more of a national issue with it than simply just, getting the protests to go on. The unfortunate thing is, of course, after this, after desegregation, that's when you have a lot of church bombings taking place. Ku Klux Klan, starts to have a greater presence again. So it's not that one system is everything, but they certainly do at least accomplish the goal that they are looking for.
You should see Black Friends. Did you see any advertisements for that movie?
Yeah, I remember, but I didn't see it.
You saw it? Yeah, it was really good.